Hi, my name is Liam, and I'm a fourth year communications student, and I'm going to be presenting a midterm assignment I did for Communications 327 Media Learning and Social Change. The assignment is a podcast, so it's just audio, but I've added visuals for this presentation, and it's about moral panics and media panics, which are moral panics that take place in the public sphere and are about new media. And specifically, I talk about TikTok, a social media app, and concern over the over sexualization of youth, which has occurred, especially regarding the app. And so, in the beginning of the podcast, I just introduced those topics, and I'm going to play the rest of it for you now. Interestingly, though, on the hierarchy of the most quote unquote corrupting media, according to Moral Panic Discourse, written forms are of the least concern. Adding visuals heightens concern, while full audiovisual media, such as film and television, are the most corrupting because of their realistic perception, but often unrealistic content, which apparently lends itself to youth imitating the perhaps deviant behaviors of the characters on screen. Given this, it is no surprise that such a panic has been sprung by TikTok. It is a fully interactive social media platform exclusively for audiovisual performance, whose popularity is basically built on the concept of imitation. Imitation of popular trends, many of which are dances to modern songs where the moves and lyrics are sexual or promiscuous in nature. Some of the most popular TikTokers are teenagers who have made careers out of this kind of dancing and popular music copying. The moral debate and concern over these promiscuous dance videos is eerily reminiscent of the outcry against Elvis Presley and his corrupting dance moves or gyrating hips over half a century ago. This sexualization of youth is a part of a larger modern trend and fear of children getting older faster. They are exposed earlier and earlier to sexual content and drugs and alcohol. These concerns and moral panics, in general, are situated in a particular perception of children and youth as innocent, fragile, a blank slate, and thus morally corruptible. But this is not the only perception of childhood. In fact, childhood as a concept is relatively young, and with it, this view and the treatment of children as separate and different, in need of special moral protection. Previously, children engaged in activities alongside adults as practically miniature adults, without toys or playtime specifically catered to them. So the conception of childhood innocence is not inherent. And it is only in this modern conception that media panics occur, because of the concern of overly mature content poisoning the mind of the child and setting it down a path of evil, so to speak. See, these conceptions arose in a time of religious prevalence, so the ideas were of children as pure and sacred, but also susceptible to Satan's grip. So the fall of mankind from Eden might be replayed in each of the children of men. On the opposition to this perspective, some believe youth to be much more capable of critical determination and discernment than they are given credit for. Perhaps rather than being corrupted by new media, they can distinguish between what is helpful and harmful, real and fictional, and use media to learn to wield it as a tool for growth, creativity, and learning. So corporations in their marketing strategies began to target children themselves rather than simply their mothers, as society started to see youth as individuals themselves with agency and impact. So the question is, which is it? Are children vulnerable or capable? This question is essentially unanswerable, and it's why we'll probably always have media panics. But the question is unanswerable because it is flawed. It fails to define its own terms. Who exactly counts as children? What defines vulnerability or capability? Are they really mutually exclusive? To return to my earlier example, it may not be too much of a stretch to suggest that Elvis's gyrating hips and subsequently disdained pop and rock stars led to the later sexual revolution, which of course is seen as a positive for many. But it is also the bane of the existence of a huge portion of Westerners who would consider themselves socially conservative. Perhaps it was even Elvis's apparent moral looseness that also contributed to the proliferation of recreational drugs in America in his impact on the young and future popular musical artists, pop and rock musicians of the 60s to 80s who were known to rely on drugs in their creative process and whose concerts notably featured drugs. This popular ubiquity of drugs, while seen as a moral panic, could possibly be blamed for the massive drug problem that still exists today, and perhaps even the problems of homelessness, as the two can go hand in hand in America and places such as the downtown east side of Vancouver. The 20th century can be viewed as a century of intense moral degradation from a certain perspective. This could be blamed on the corruption of youth from a certain perspective. But it's impossible to know for sure what caused the harms that can even be agreed upon. It definitely couldn't be traced to Elvis with any degree of certainty. But that's not to say that the objects of moral panics don't have real harms. That's the difficulty with moral panics. They lie on a spectrum, with some boiling down to complete myths with no discernible effects, while with others, it's impossible to know whether the response was even overblown at all. If I was a parent now, which I definitely am not, even knowing the history of media panics, I would still have difficulty with TikTok and the sexualization of youth. I know I probably wouldn't want my kids listening to or watching the WAP, let alone copying the dance moves while singing along. But at a certain point, it becomes impossible to shield youth from these things. Which brings us back to the issue of age. 4, 9, 13, and 18 are all incredibly different ages in terms of their capacities and vulnerabilities, no matter what side of the debate you're on. And yet, they can all be referred to as children. Modernity has seen the segmentation of childhood into more and more categories for marketing, but ultimately these segments can be helpful as they become part of the imagination of parents as they continue to negotiate cultural norms with their children. Which brings us back to moral panics. In academia, they are generally believed to be the struggles of power over the lines of morality between children and youth who, with ambition, seek to grow and expand their horizons and challenge the status quo, and the older generations and institutions fond of the good old days. While this definition may underemphasize the element of genuine parental concern, undoubtedly a struggle rages on, and has for centuries at least, and it will continue. Perhaps the best thing we can do is hope that children truly are more capable than we think, and that their ambition and striving will, rather than destroying them, cause them to lead society better than previous generations ever have.